Matt, why don't you give us a little bit of a background and what you've done in the last number of years, and tell us what you're doing now.
Yeah. First of all, it's just good to be part of this conference and to be a workshop presenter. I feel like I'm in the presence of greatness, and it's a real honor to be doing this. I am the executive vice president at Kansas Christian College. We're in Overland Park, Kansas. We've been in existence for about 80 years, 82 years actually. Most of that time we were Kansas City College and Bible School. So um, a lot of what you'll hear from me today is from the context of really a tradition, what's has been historically a traditional Bible college. And I started there in 2015, kind of doing some programming there. Actually, I got into education by accident, I tell people. But I came from a counseling background. I ended up doing some educational programming for Kansas Department of Corrections, went back to Kansas Christian, my alma mater, and kind of stumbled into non-traditional forms of education. And so when I started jumping into this adult market at Kansas Christian, we were not yet accredited. We were in candidate status. This was 2015. I think our head count of students was, I only counted 12. Some people told me there were 20, but I only counted 12 students that were there, part of the traditional program. We had no online program. So we started an online program with one degree program, and we've added another degree program. We've not seen crazy growth in that. I'm not coming to you with thousands of students, but we have gone from 12 total students to close to 200 today. Not all on the online side, that's both traditional and online. Up until 2019, I was the Vice President of Professional and Online Studies. And last year we went through a presidential change. I'm now the Executive Vice President of the college and operate in that capacity. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thanks so much, Matt, for doing this. And if you'd like to go ahead and start, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So just knowing just a little bit of my background there, one of the things when I started looking at this conference, I started thinking, from my context, kind of the smaller college, very traditional Bible college. I've heard, some common themes throughout a lot of the sessions today. We primarily through the years trained pastors, missionaries, teachers, and it was very much come to us, and we had our real distinctives as an institution coming from the faith tradition that we came from. So again, I think as I go through this, I think that context will help you to understand some of where I'm coming from, and hopefully you can contextualize it to your setting. But today, just talking about adult learning, connecting theory and practice. One of the questions I would ask just for reflection, I find this helpful when I'm attending workshops, and that is, as you read this description of this workshop talking about adult learning theory, andragogy versus pedagogy, what do you expect to learn from this workshop, and how might some of the things that we're talking about benefit you or your institution? So just kind of be thinking about that, and hopefully that'll spur some of the Q&A as we work through this. Obviously, I think probably many of you could teach the andragogy better than I. Probably more of an expert than I am on these kind of things. I will say, because I have a sense of humor, that the picture of the guy with a man bun was definitely not part of our faith tradition moving forward or going back a few years. Some of you might get a chuckle out of that, I don't know. But just the guiding principles, and this is just a quick overview, guiding principles of adult learning theory. Of course, 6 of them need to know. Adults need to know why they need to learn something before learning it. They need to know there's a consequence to what they're learning, whether that's a benefit or a reward to what they're learning, or a consequence if they do not learn it. Of course, self-concept of adults is heavily dependent upon a move towards self-direction. Adult learners need to be responsible for their own decisions. They need to be seen and treated by others as capable of self-direction. Adult learner experience, prior experiences of the learner provide a rich resource for learning. Adults, most of your online students, they come with a greater volume of experience, as well as a different quality of experience than the traditional student coming out of high school. Readiness to learn. Adults typically become ready to learn when they experience a need to cope with a life situation. In other words, there, and this kind of touches on a later assumption, but they want to deal with real life situations and find solutions to what they're facing in life right now, whether that be gaining a degree so that they can earn more money, whether that be learning skills to better lead or better manage. It's real life. And then orientation to learning is life-centered. Education is a process of developing increased competency levels to achieve their full potential. Relative information that will aid in solving immediate problems. In other words, it's contextualized learning. And then motivation to learn. It's intrinsic, or it's internal rather than external. Quality of life, the motivation, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-actualization. And then with adults too, a lot of times in talking about these assumptions, sometimes there's barriers to motivation with adults too. I'm sure we've all faced that with some of our students, but that is like, I know this was referred to in a prior discussion today, but like really they're doing life, right? They're managing, our adult students, they're managing the kids at home, they are working a job, and so in some ways, the education is secondary to those things. So those can be both motivators and barriers to motivation as well. So I kind of ran through that very quickly. I did that because I think I'm making the assumption that we're all in theory. But what I found as we started our program, and as I thought back about some of the challenges that we faced, some of the barriers to growth that we faced, I found that many of the, what I'm calling potholes on the journey, many of these went back to trying to do what we have traditionally done over the last 80 years, instead of understanding who online students predominantly are. And there were just several I call it failing forward. I feel like we've stumbled forward a lot of times, but just wanted to share some potholes on this journey to avoid. The first is viewing adults as grown-up traditional students. This is just intrinsic to andragogy, but adults are not just grown children. They learn differently than children. Some of our challenges from the start were we really tried to take what we already had and to the best of our ability, duplicate that online. But what we found was, obviously we were dealing with a completely different group of students. File number 2, and hopefully hopefully I can articulate this well. This can or has in some settings stepped on toes, but confusing your institutional and theological distinctives with instructional design. You know, in talking to a group like this, it sounds crazy that we could do that, but particularly I think in the Bible college setting and with colleagues that I've worked with across the years, we get to thinking there's something special about our methods. And a lot of times that goes back to pedagogy versus andragogy, and that is, you know, it's very professor oriented on the traditional side. There's a professor that's very popular that articulates theological distinctives well, or is charismatic in nature. And sometimes we can get that message confused with the method. And I found a lot of the battles early on were trying to help people understand we still can have these distinctives and these messages, but the delivery is going to look so much different as you begin to enter into that adult education world and that online world. The pothole number 3 that I mentioned is a bit ironic, but we've heard a lot about getting faculty to buy into things. You know, where we started with, if I told you the kind of budget that, like, we literally have had very, very little capital, like a lot of Christian colleges, Bible colleges, the margin that we've operated on has been razor thin. And so we used faculty early on, especially that had taught on the traditional side. And ironically, I would get frustrated with them for not understanding that you couldn't just translate what you did in the traditional classroom over to the online classroom. But then I began to realize that I was trying to train them with pedagogy rather than andragogy. In other words, I was trying to come from a very authoritative standpoint instead of a collaborative standpoint, instead of honoring their experience that they brought and helping them to understand and see the theory and the philosophy behind it and get buy-in that way. So that was an ironic one that realized, wow, I'm doing the very thing that I wish, or that I'm trying to get my faculty not to do. Pothole number 4, being cynical rather than collaborative. This really speaks to student experience, but we, sometimes within various departments of a college or a university, there is a cynicism toward online programs or online students, especially if you have a long history of traditional education. And what I found was when we began to shift in our dealings with students from being cynical of what they brought, the experience that they brought to the table, whether that be working with the registrar to evaluate credit for prior learning, whether that be working with vocational schools or partnerships with churches or those pieces. We had a tendency, and I'm just trying to be congruent, we had a tendency to be very guarded on what we allowed students to bring to the table. So we approached it with more of a cynical mindset rather than a collaborative mindset, which again goes back to that adult learning theory. And then I mentioned pothole number 5, being problem focused rather than solution focused. When we when we started our programs, we a lot of times, you draw from the experience you have, but we a lot of times would get bogged down, particularly at the curriculum level, we would get bogged down with this isn't working like it's supposed to work. This is a problem, or this curriculum is a problem. And we would focus so much on the problem that we couldn't see the solution that was right in front of us. So I'm coming from a perspective that is, I think I'm a purist when it comes to adult learning theory, and that is, if I can get my faculty, my staff, even to an extent, my recruiters, to understand how adults learn, understand what they bring to the table, then we started seeing a change in enrollment, and especially actually in retention. A lot of these things go back to, and I did just have a question for reflection here. Are there examples, can you think of any examples in your own institutions of some of these potholes that I've mentioned, or there are additional potholes that are worth discussing? So what does this look like? What does this look like practically for me? I think we have, a shameless plug for InterLearn. They have helped bring expertise to the table that we simply did not have at Kansas Christian. And that is a curriculum that is built with the conceptual framework of andragogy. And what I found is a resistance sometimes from the faculty to, they just, frankly, they just didn't think the curriculum was quality. And the reason they thought that was they were looking at it from a very, very traditional standpoint. So two things, when I began to kind of connect the dots for people, one was the awareness that facilitation could be a powerful tool. So a great example of this is I had a professor that did very well in the traditional classroom, really struggled in the online classroom because this professor with an asynchronous learning, they could not impart their very strong lecture style. And when I began to, when that professor began to read some of the studies and began to read up on adult learning theory, they began to be student-centered rather than faculty-centered, and they began to see some major changes in the classroom. And this is actually one of our lead professors now in the online program that seemed to be very excited, more excited now about teaching online than on campus, which is crazy in many regards. So we talk about awareness and then appropriation. When we're talking about appropriation, I really believe that curriculum, some people talked earlier about curriculum design really being a tapestry. But I think curriculum provides an enormous toolbox to facilitate the self-actualization of students, or to transform students. In other words, the facilitator of a class, the faculty, if they're using curriculum correctly, that curriculum can be a tool, and if it's well-designed curriculum, that curriculum can be a tool to really help the students bring, self-actualize, reach the goals that they came to the program with and they came to the program for. So just want to talk about some real practical ways. We'll go quickly here and then we'll take questions to connect theory and practice. And just tying these back to the assumptions. The need to know, asking good questions. What do we expect to learn from the start with our recruiters? We've tried to train this. What do you expect to learn in this program? How can this benefit you? What's in it for me? You're with them. What's in it for you? The self-concept, collaborative, self-directed environment with adequate tools and instruction and guided self-direction. We've fallen into both where we've not provided enough direction in classes and where we were trying to micromanage students as well. That adult learning experience, helping students figure out what learning objectives look like in their own life, provide opportunities for self-reflection, what was helpful, in terms of the class. A lot of, I know a lot of curriculum is built this way, but again, that need to bring the experience of the learner to the classroom is so important. The readiness to learn. Relevance is key. Tasks and projects which encourage adult learners to independently research and explore subject matter, gaining that firsthand experience is important. Orientation to learning, case studies, role-playing simulations, self-evaluation. Again, what we found recently in recent months to be extremely effective with students is having an advisor give them a call. Give them a call every, we don't do it every class, but every couple of months or so, and just have a conversation about how their learning in the classroom is benefiting their life and what their goals are. And it just, again, continues to connect them to, connect what they're doing to the goal and to their life at hand. Of course, understanding the reason behind each activity and what skills students can develop by completing the task at hand. I found not only is that important for the student, but it's really, especially if your institution has curriculum that is fairly universal or fairly lockstep, and that is making sure that your facilitators really understand and buy into the reason behind each activity and what skills students can develop and complete with the tasks at hand. So much of adult learning theory, I think we live in that world, but what I found, even living in that world, I was educated primarily in the world of traditional education. So being able to not only look at adult learning theory when it comes to curriculum design, but also to educate, again, I said it before, but recruiters, even financial aid personnel, on helping them understand how adults learn has been invaluable to solving a lot of the problems that we face. One of the things that's helped me from my counseling background is just that client-centered or person-centered Rogerian counseling, but that is just this idea of trying to teach faculty as well as admissions personnel to handle students with empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence. In other words, just being real with them has made a world of difference and really helped to integrate adult learning theory into every aspect of our program. So questions?
What questions you guys have? Let's see, Cynthia says, we find students need a lot of handholding in mastering the learning management system. We use a coaching system where a new student gets a personal touch early on. A good start is critical. It's a great point, Cynthia.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've started to, we actually have our professor that typically does, or professors now that typically do our orientation classes, actually do some one-on-one coaching and screen sharing with students, especially if they are struggling to navigate.
You mentioned the potholes, and the number 3 struck me pretty hard. When I was at one institution being trained as a faculty member, it was a 4-hour session of lecture to train adults in facilitative measures with no facilitation and straight lecture, solid 4 hours. And that so many times when you don't look at how you're delivering and how you're developing your training, you're going to fall into things that you're comfortable doing. And for a lot of us, pedagogy is how we were trained in a lot of systems. So that's important to make sure that you're doing things and modeling for your faculty so that they get it, they understand how they should be doing it, rather than learning the ways that they learned their whole life in traditional education.
Yeah, and one of the things that it's hard, I think, for us that have been so information and content driven a lot of times with pedagogy is recognizing the power. And if I can even reflecting theologically a little bit about the ability of the Holy Spirit to help people by His grace bring relevant experience to the table. You know, one of the most powerful things I've experienced is in my counseling supervision. We worked in groups at one time where for 2 weeks in our groups, we were not allowed to ask a question. All we could do was simply listen, affirm, give positive regard, give respect to the others in the group. And we saw people, it was amazing to see people have cathartic experiences simply by giving them space to bring their experience to the table and to begin to process that with people. Now I know that there's a little bit of difference in education, but that's a powerful example to me that if you facilitate things correctly, you can really see students change because they're bringing just a wealth of knowledge and experience to the classroom already.
Right. Bradford says, very good points. Makes us examine if we are considering new ways to discuss adult education. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate your time and your presentation today. And if there's any other comments or questions you want to forward to Matt, let us know and we'll get them to him, okay?
Thank you.